The stench of the Roman summer hangs heavy, a humid blanket woven from refuse and sweat. Thousands line the narrow street, their faces upturned, eyes fixed on the magnificent papal procession. The Holy Father John VIII rides in state, his vestments gleaming, blessing the fervent crowd. Suddenly a tremor runs through the square, a ripple of unease replacing the reverence. A gasp, then another, spreading like wildfire through the packed humanity. The Pope's sedan chair falters, his bearers struggling. A sharp, guttural cry tears through the solemnity, a sound utterly out of place for a male pontiff. The gilded chair lurches violently, and the Pope, a figure usually serene, clutches his abdomen, his face contorted in agony. Another scream, primal and raw, rips from his throat, echoing off the ancient stone buildings. This is not a man suffering from illness or a sudden attack. This is the unmistakable, agonizing cry of a woman in childbirth. The crowd recoils, their awe turning to horror as the crimson stain blooms on the papal vestments, and beneath the silken robes, a tiny, squalling infant emerges onto the cobblestones, bathed in the glaring light of Rome. The unthinkable has happened, her carefully guarded secret ripped from her in the most public, visceral way imaginable. The murmurs turn to shouts, then a roar of outrage and disbelief, as the impossible truth is laid bare for all to see. But who was this woman, and how did she ascend to the highest office in Christendom, only for her secret to unravel in the most public, agonizing way imaginable? But to understand how we got here, to grasp the sheer audacity of such a deception, we need to go back. We rewind to the early 9th century, to a Europe still emerging from the chaos following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, yet flourishing under the Carolingian Renaissance. This was a world of stark contrasts, magnificent cathedrals and mud-walled villages, illuminated manuscripts alongside widespread illiteracy. For most, life was dictated by the rhythms of agriculture and the unquestionable authority of the church. For women, however, the options were even more constrained. Their roles were rigidly defined: wife, mother, nun. Access to formal education, beyond basic literacy for religious purposes, was almost entirely forbidden, especially the kind of rigorous classical and theological studies that forged the intellectual leaders of the age. Yet even within these rigid confines, brilliant minds yearned for more. Imagine a young girl, perhaps in Ingelheim am Rhine, a town famed for Charlemagne's palace, feeling the spark of an insatiable curiosity, watching her brothers attend schools she could only dream of. The yearning for knowledge, for a life beyond the domestic sphere, was a dangerous, subversive desire. It was a time when the pursuit of wisdom was considered a masculine domain, and any woman who dared to trespass faced suspicion, ridicule, or worse. The very idea of a woman engaging in serious theological debate was anathema, a perversion of the natural order. This deeply entrenched societal structure was the crucible in which an extraordinary, desperate plan would be forged, an audacious bid to break free from the chains of expectation and forge a destiny utterly unimaginable. And the very rules designed to keep women in their place would, ironically, provide the framework for her improbable ascent. The European stage in the mid-9th century was one of shifting powers and profound religious fervor. The papacy, though often embroiled in political struggles with secular rulers and internal Roman factions, was undeniably the spiritual heart of Western Christendom. Rome, the eternal city, remained a beacon, drawing pilgrims and scholars alike. Emperor Charlemagne's legacy still loomed large, having fostered a rebirth of learning and culture across his vast empire. Education was primarily housed within monasteries and cathedrals, accessible almost exclusively to men of clerical ambition. Latin was the language of scholarship, theology, and power. The intellectual centers of the Carolingian Empire, like Fulda or Corvey, were vibrant hubs where ancient texts were copied, debated, and preserved. To become a scholar, a teacher, or indeed a leader within the church required years of rigorous study, an intimate knowledge of scripture, philosophy, and rhetoric. It demanded immersion in an exclusively male environment. This was not merely a matter of social custom. It was enshrined in canon law, which expressly forbade women from holding any priestly or hierarchical office. The very concept of a female priest was a theological impossibility, let alone a female bishop or, most controversially, a pope. The stakes for any transgression were not just social ostracization, but eternal damnation. The Church taught that women were inherently weaker, more susceptible to sin, and thus unfit for spiritual leadership over men. This deep-seated conviction was the bedrock of medieval society, a truth as immutable as the stone walls of St. Peter's Basilica. And it was against this formidable, unyielding wall of dogma and tradition that a single, audacious woman would attempt to carve out her impossible destiny, aiming for a seat of power that was fundamentally designed to exclude her. The legend begins not with a thunderclap, but with a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. Ingelheim, around the year 819, saw the birth of a girl, whose intellect, even in childhood, was noted as unnaturally keen. Denied formal schooling, she devoured books in secret, often learning alongside a brother who was permitted access to the monastic schools. This initial transgression, a clandestine pursuit of knowledge, was the first fracture. The critical moment, however, came with an opportunity, perhaps after her brother's death, or through the mentorship of a sympathetic scholar. She adopted her brother's identity, or perhaps simply reinvented herself as a young man, embarking on a scholarly journey under the name Johannes Anglicus, John the English-born. He was described as remarkably erudite, possessing a quick wit and an astonishing grasp of theology, often outshining his male peers. Yet there were small peculiarities. He was always a bit too reserved in physical contests, a touch too delicate in his mannerisms for a robust scholar. His voice, though deepened through effort, sometimes held an unexpected timbre, an almost lyrical quality that set it apart. His face, though lacking a beard, was easily dismissed as a sign of youth, or perhaps a natural condition. These were details easily overlooked, small dissonances in the grand symphony of monastic life. No one questioned the intellect, the dedication, or the piety of Johannes. In a world where outward appearances often masked inner conviction, and where intellectual prowess was highly valued, these minor anomalies were conveniently ignored or rationalized away. This subtle deviation was easily overlooked, especially in the hallowed halls where ambition often masked eccentricity. But it was a crack, a hairline fracture in the facade that would one day shatter. The initial deception, carefully maintained during her years as a student, began to escalate into a perilous gamble as Johannes Anglicus rose through the ecclesiastical ranks. From humble student she advanced to teacher, then to a respected cleric in Rome, where her formidable intellect and rhetorical skills garnered widespread admiration. She moved through the male-dominated corridors of power with an unnerving confidence, her secret growing heavier with each step up the ladder. The thing that should have stopped her, the rigorous physical examinations often required for certain priestly ordinations or entry into higher monastic orders, somehow never materialized in a definitive, revealing way. Perhaps the procedures were less stringent for scholars focused on intellectual pursuits, or perhaps her quick wit and social charm simply diverted suspicion. A specific detail that makes the stomach drop is the constant, suffocating reality of her physical disguise. The subtle pressure of tightly bound cloth against her chest was a constant, suffocating reminder, a secret worn closer than any garment, a constant source of discomfort and fear. Every close encounter, every shared bath, every moment of casual male camaraderie was a tightrope walk over an abyss of exposure. She lived in a perpetual state of heightened awareness, the threat of discovery a shadow dogging her every move. Yet her intellect and perceived piety continued to impress. She was seen as a rising star, a man destined for greatness within the church, completely oblivious to the extraordinary truth hidden beneath the layers of vestments and carefully constructed persona. The very respect she earned solidified the deception, making it increasingly difficult to turn back. Yet the deception persisted, testament not only to her cunning, but to the collective blindness of a system unprepared for such audacious infiltration. And the stakes, already impossibly high, were about to be raised further. The second wave of escalation began with her arrival in Rome, a city teeming with ambition, intrigue, and ruthless politicking. Johannes Anglicus quickly gained a reputation not only for profound learning, but for exceptional administrative skill. She became a notary to the Curia, then a cardinal, positions of immense influence and visibility. She attracted the attention of Pope Leo IV, who, impressed by her talents, took her into his inner circle. When Leo IV died in 855, the stage was set for the ultimate gamble. The Roman clergy and populace, seeking a man of intellect and piety, elected Johannes as his successor, assuming the name Pope Joan VIII. This marked the zenith of her deception, but also exposed her to unparalleled scrutiny. Now every decision, every public appearance, every subtle gesture would be under the magnifying glass of power-hungry rivals and devout believers. Introduce Cardinal Anastasius, a man known for his sharp intellect and even sharper tongue, a prominent Roman noble and a key player in the intricate papal politics of the era. He harbored ambitions of his own and was meticulous in observing the new pontiff. Anastasius, a former librarian of the Holy Roman Church, watched the new pontiff with an unnervingly critical eye, a flicker of suspicion sometimes crossing his gaunt face. He noticed the Pope's unusual reticence in private, a certain avoidance of rough male jesting, and a peculiar pallor that occasionally afflicted him. These observations were fragmented, easily dismissed as personal eccentricity or the toll of high office, but they lingered. Anastasius himself was no stranger to controversy, having been excommunicated multiple times for political maneuvering, making him a shrewd, albeit cynical, observer of papal conduct. Something didn't add up, a dissonant note in the grand symphony of the papacy that only a few truly astute ears might perceive amidst the cheers and pronouncements of infallibility. For nearly 2 years, the story of Pope Joan VIII was that of a capable, learned, and well-regarded pontiff. His reign, officially placed between Leo IV and Benedict III, seemed unremarkable, a continuation of spiritual leadership in a tumultuous age. Everything pointed one way, towards a legitimate male successor to Saint Peter, ruling from the heart of Christendom. But then whispers began, subversive and persistent, suggesting a truth so scandalous it threatened the very foundation of the Church. The traditional narrative, carefully preserved in official papal lists, was suddenly confronted by a radically different account. It wasn't just a rumor, but a detail that started appearing in serious historical chronicles. The story began to circulate. Pope Joan VIII was not a man, but a woman. This wasn't merely heresy, it was an act of profound deception, an abomination in the eyes of the Church, a challenge to divine order itself. The shock wasn't just that a woman could disguise herself, but that she could ascend to the highest spiritual office, administer sacraments, and lead the entire Catholic world while harboring such an unspeakable secret. The existence of such a tale fundamentally undermined the perceived infallibility of the papacy and the absolute authority of its male-only hierarchy. This was more than a mere scandal, it was an existential threat to the institution. The official history, once so solid and unyielding, now seemed to splinter, revealing a dark, hidden current running beneath the surface, challenging the very nature of truth itself. And the revelations of this hidden truth were about to go far deeper than anyone could have initially imagined. What the pivot revealed was not just a simple story of deception, but a series of interconnected historical details that lent an unsettling weight to the legend. The earliest known account comes from the 13th century Dominican chronicler Jean de Mailly, who recorded the story of a certain pope, or rather popess, who is not listed in the catalogue of popes. He described her as a brilliant scholar who, disguised as a man, became a notary, then a cardinal, and eventually pope. But the most widely cited and influential account is from Martin of Opava, Martinus Scotus, whose Chronicon Pontificum et Imperatorum, also from the 13th century, provided a more detailed narrative. Martin explicitly states, John Anglicus, born in Mainz, was pope for 2 years, 7 months, and 4 days. She was a woman. She became pregnant by one of her servants. When she was on horseback, going from St. Peter's to the Lateran, she gave birth between the Colosseum and St. Clement's Church. The detail often overlooked in casual retellings is not just the birth itself, but the immediate, horrified reaction of the Roman populace and the subsequent institutional changes. It wasn't merely shock, it was profound spiritual terror, the belief that divine wrath would be unleashed upon Rome. The location, specifically between the Colosseum and San Clement, became a site of enduring infamy. After the scandal, it was widely reported that future papal processions deliberately avoided this cursed street. Furthermore, another practice emerged, the sedia stercuraria, a chair with a pierced seat, which later popes were said to have sat upon, not as a symbolic gesture of humility, but for a physical examination to confirm their male sex. These were not isolated anecdotes. These were chronicled details that suggested a very real, very traumatic event had forced the Church to implement measures to prevent any recurrence. The collective memory of Rome had been irrevocably scarred, forcing rituals that spoke volumes about a truth too terrifying to fully acknowledge. Beyond the theological implications and historical debates lies the profound human cost. For Pope Joan, the woman who may have been born in Ingelheim around 819, her life was a testament to extraordinary ambition and an unbearable burden. She sacrificed every vestige of her true self for knowledge and power, for a place in a world that vehemently denied her existence. Her childhood curiosity led to a lifetime of elaborate deception. Every day, every interaction was a performance, a constant fear of being unmasked. The loneliness of her secret must have been immense, a profound isolation from genuine connection, even as she occupied the most public office in the world. She carried not only the weight of the papacy, but the terrifying secret of her gender, a secret that could, and ultimately did, lead to her utter destruction. Her identity, whether Johannes Anglicus or her birth name, was ultimately subsumed by the legend, becoming a mere vessel for a scandalous tale. When her secret was ripped from her in such a public, agonizing manner, she was not just unmasked, she was annihilated. Her legacy was not of a learned pontiff, but of an abomination, her memory subjected to a deliberate erasure that transcended mere historical editing. She lost her identity, her life, and any chance of an honorable historical remembrance. The legend portrays her final moments as horrific, a public stoning or immediate death, a brutal punctuation mark to a life defined by extraordinary pretense and ultimate exposure. Her story is a stark reminder of the crushing consequences for those who dared to defy the rigid societal and religious norms of their time, particularly if they were women seeking power. Following the horrific revelation, the Church's response, according to many historians, was a meticulously orchestrated cover-up, a desperate attempt to excise the embarrassing truth from the official record. One of the most damning pieces of evidence, often cited as deliberately altered or destroyed, was a specific passage in the Chronicon Pontificum et Imperatorum by Martin of Opava. Though many copies of Martin's chronicle contain the entry about Pope Joan, subsequent versions, particularly those produced under ecclesiastical supervision, either omitted the passage entirely or subtly altered the papal succession to erase any mention of her. This wasn't merely a clerical error. It was a systematic attempt at damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, designed to make her non-existent. Another critical aspect of the cover-up involved the papal lists themselves. Official Vatican catalogues of popes skip from Leo IV to Benedict III, leaving no space for John VIII in that specific period. The original numbering of Popes John was also allegedly resequenced to avoid acknowledging a John VIII in the mid-9th century. Furthermore, many early chronicles and manuscripts that mentioned Pope Joan either vanished from libraries or had the relevant pages torn out or defaced. The beneficiaries of this silence were clear: the papacy itself, eager to maintain its image of divine mandate and an unbroken, exclusively male succession. The very foundation of its authority rested on this unbroken line, and the revelation of a female pope, especially one whose secret ended so spectacularly, was an intolerable stain. The mystery wasn't just what happened, but who precisely ordered the systematic historical revision and how thoroughly they managed to enforce it across centuries. The Church wielded immense power over information, and in this instance, it used it with ruthless efficiency to bury a truth it found utterly unacceptable. And the efforts to investigate this hidden history would eventually uncover even more contradictions. Despite the Church's concerted efforts, the legend of Pope Joan proved remarkably resilient, refusing to be fully erased. Over centuries, various investigators, both secular and religious, sought to uncover the truth hidden beneath layers of dogma and denial. In the 17th century, the French Protestant scholar David Blondel undertook a meticulous examination of papal records and medieval chronicles, specifically focusing on the discrepancies surrounding Pope Joan VIII. Blondel, a prominent Calvinist theologian, concluded that the story was a complete fabrication, an anti-Catholic polemic invented by medieval writers, not a historical fact. He based his findings on the lack of contemporary evidence from the 9th century and the inconsistencies he found in the later chronicles. However, his work, while influential, did not end the debate. Subsequent historians and researchers, looking beyond Blondel's initial findings, revisited the earlier medieval sources that predated the Reformation. They meticulously cross-referenced different versions of chronicles like those of Jean de Mailly and Martin of Opava, noting the consistent appearance of the Pope Joan narrative across disparate sources, some of which were clearly Catholic in origin. They also paid close attention to archaeological and ceremonial evidence, specifically the sedia stercoraria. While the Church maintained its official purpose was symbolic, persistent tales of papal verification on a pierced chair, coupled with the documented change in the papal procession route through Rome, provided a compelling lens. These weren't definitive proofs, but rather a collection of circumstantial evidence that suggested something significant occurred, something that demanded a practical, physical response from the papacy. The cumulative effect of these seemingly disparate clues kept the investigation alive, suggesting that the truth might be more complex than either outright acceptance or complete dismissal. Yet the official explanations continued to deny any veracity to the persistent narrative. The official explanation for the Pope Joan legend, particularly gaining traction from the Counter-Reformation onwards, posits that she was nothing more than a polemical invention, a piece of anti-Catholic propaganda crafted by Protestants during the Reformation. This narrative claims the story was a deliberate smear, designed to undermine the authority and infallibility of the papacy. Church historians argued that the tale was either a symbolic allegory for a weak or corrupt pope, or a misunderstanding of historical events, perhaps even a conflation with another historical figure. They pointed to the lack of contemporary 9th century accounts and the fact that the story only appeared in the 13th century, centuries after the alleged events. For a long time, this explanation served as the Church's bulwark against the scandalous legend, effectively dismissing it as a malicious fabrication. However, this official explanation doesn't fully hold up under closer scrutiny. The most glaring contradiction is the undeniable existence of the Pope Joan story in numerous Catholic chronicles dating back to the 13th century, long before the Protestant Reformation began in the 16th century. For instance, the Chronica Majora by Matthew Paris, a respected Benedictine monk writing in the mid-13th century, clearly includes the Pope Joan narrative. It wasn't a Protestant invention, it was a story circulating within Catholic circles for centuries. If it were pure propaganda, why would devout Catholic chroniclers, with no anti-papal agenda, record it as historical fact? The existence of these early, internal Catholic accounts directly refutes the claim of a purely Protestant origin. Furthermore, the persistent rituals like the sedia stercoraria and the changed procession route, while open to interpretation, are harder to explain away as mere Protestant slander. These physical ceremonial changes suggest a deeper, more immediate catalyst than a later, politically motivated invention. The official explanation, while convenient, struggles to account for the origins and widespread acceptance of the story within the very institution it sought to protect. So if Pope Joan wasn't a Protestant fabrication, and the official denial doesn't fully account for its existence in early Catholic chronicles, what then is the closest truth we can ascertain? The most credible theory among contemporary historians is that the legend of Pope Joan likely possesses a kernel of historical truth, albeit one embellished and mythologized over centuries. This theory, supported by scholars like Rosemary Skirma, suggests that while a woman may not have reigned for 2 years as a full pope, a significant and scandalous incident involving a woman in a high ecclesiastical position, perhaps even disguised as a man, likely occurred. This event would have been so shocking and disruptive to the patriarchal order of the Church that it necessitated immediate and lasting institutional changes, subsequently becoming a cautionary tale. The specific evidence that backs this theory is multifaceted. Firstly, the aforementioned pre-Reformation Catholic chronicles, which consistently mention Pope Joan. Their existence is difficult to dismiss as mere fiction when they often detail other historical facts accurately. Secondly, the physical evidence of the sedia stercoraria asterisk, the pierced chair, and the subsequent ritual of verification of male genitalia for newly elected popes. While its exact origin and purpose are debated, its connection to the Pope Joan legend is too strong to ignore. The fact that papal processions changed their route to avoid a specific street is another powerful, if circumstantial, piece of evidence. These are not just stories, they are institutional adaptations that point to a unique, traumatic event involving gender and papal succession. It suggests that Rome itself had a collective memory of a profound scandal, one that touched the very core of papal authority. The story endured not because it was invented propaganda, but because it resonated with an event that left an indelible, if officially suppressed, mark on the history and rituals of the papacy. The full truth remains elusive, obscured by time and deliberate obfuscation, but the evidence strongly suggests that something truly extraordinary and deeply unsettling once transpired. The legend of Pope Joan, regardless of its precise historical accuracy, culminates in a single, most disturbing fact that reverberates through history: the institutional response to her alleged unmasking. After the agonizing public birth, tradition dictates she was immediately seized, dragged through the streets, and either stoned to death by the furious Roman mob or executed by papal decree, her body buried in the very spot her secret exploded into the world. Her name was not just erased, her very existence became a byword for a monstrous transgression, a warning echoing through the ages against any challenge to the patriarchal order of the Church. But the true horror lies in the subsequent, deliberate, and chilling ritual instituted by the papacy to prevent any recurrence. For centuries thereafter, upon the election of a new pope, he was made to sit upon the infamous sedia stercoraria, the pierced chair. Before the official enthronement, a cardinal would reach through the opening in the seat to physically verify the sex of the newly elected pontiff. The ritual culminated with the pronouncement, "Duos testiculos habet et benependens," which translates to "he has two testicles and they hang well." This public, humiliating, and incredibly intrusive physical examination was not merely symbolic, it was a brutal, tangible consequence of the Pope Joan scandal. It codified into papal tradition the extreme lengths the Church would go to ensure that such an abomination could never again infiltrate its highest office. The most disturbing fact is not just the deception or the birth, but the absolute institutional terror it unleashed, forcing an entire lineage of popes to undergo a demeaning ritual, a constant, grotesque reminder of the woman they had tried so desperately to erase from history, and the profound threat she represented to their sacred, male-only power. The legend of Pope Joan, whether entirely factual or a potent allegory, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, gender, and the construction of history. It reveals the extraordinary lengths to which individuals will go for knowledge and influence when faced with insurmountable societal barriers. More profoundly, it exposes the fragility of institutional facades and the enduring human capacity to both create and erase narratives to suit a prevailing agenda. The Church's desperate efforts to suppress the story, from altering chronicles to instituting intrusive rituals, highlight not only the perceived threat she posed, but also the deep-seated anxieties about female power in an exclusively male domain. It serves as a stark reminder that history is not a static collection of facts, but a dynamic, often contested narrative shaped by those in power. We are left to ponder not just the identity of this audacious woman, but the enduring questions her legend provokes. What other truths have been deliberately buried? How many other stories have been silenced to maintain a particular order? And what does it say about humanity's willingness to believe, to deny, and to rewrite its own past when confronted with a reality too scandalous to accept? The story of Pope Joan is a testament to the fact that even the most meticulously constructed histories can harbor cracks, through which the most astonishing and disturbing truths can eventually seep. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.